Coming up on show 839, the Nissan Ariya, an all-new EV, has been revealed, and I've got all the details for you if you stick around. Plus, the Jaguar XJ electric sedan looks like it could be delayed a little bit. There's political moves in the US that could help EV drivers, and more pictures of the Skoda Enyaq. It's based on the Volkswagen ID4 with Skoda styling, and this time with different camouflage, so we'll dig into that as well. Well, good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, wherever you're listening around the world. Welcome to EV News Daily. This is what happened on Wednesday, 15th of July. My name is Martyn Lee, and I go through every EV story, so you don't have to. And myev.com in the US has every EV that you might possibly want to buy. If you're selling, check it out as well. myev.com is a place where you can learn about EVs and really connect with like-minded people, much like the listeners of this show tune in every single day to join in with that discussion about electric vehicles. Check out myev.com if you're in the US. So big news, new electric car from Nissan. Of course, they were first 10 years ago with the Leaf. They had an early lead. I must admit, I've been a little bit critical recently of Nissan losing interest in the Leaf. But really, apart from a facelift, and excuse me, but it was a facelift, the internals, the body of the car, despite the Leaf 40 and the 62 kilowatt hour, much of it remained the same. So I'm delighted to see what Nissan have been working on, beavering away on in the background, and that is the Ariya, spelled A-R-I-Y-A. Alright, okay, going to get two things out the way to begin with. Yes, in Europe and the US, it will come with CCS combo plug. No CHAdeMO. Huge change for Nissan. Yes, it will come with CHAdeMO in the home market of Japan. Yes, the battery pack will have active thermal management, liquid cooling, so important for any modern BMS to have that control over the battery temperature. And whether or not you're doing the funky things that like Teslas are doing, which is preconditioning the batteries these days when you set the charger on the sat-nav, whether that's a supercharger or a third-party charger, just to get the battery all nice and toasty and at the right temperature. Whether you're doing funky stuff like that or just trying to keep it cool when you're pumping electrons into it, simply relying on passive thermal management, it's just not going to cut it in 2021. And yes, not this year, next year. In fact, I checked out the nissan.co.uk website just before I came on the air to record this, and it says coming to the UK in late 2021. What do you define as late? I mean, if you want to push it, that is the end of December next year. You're talking about a car that is at least over a year away. And there's nothing in this car that's particularly special that Nissan couldn't do today. So let's dig into it. All right, 5 different specs. The first 4 are kind of variations. So there's 2 battery sizes. There is a 63 kilowatt hour and an 87 kilowatt hour battery pack. Those are the 2 pack sizes, 63 and 87, and that's net, that's usable, by the way. And both of those either come with a front wheel drive or all wheel drive. So there's your 4 options, big or small battery, 2 or 4 wheel drive. Then there's a final 5th high performance option, which will be the bigger battery pack and more power as well. They all, like I say, are capable of 130 kilowatt plus charging. I read an interview a little while ago with one of the engineers. It wasn't on like a mainstream website, but he was saying, we charge it 137, which I thought was interesting. And then the press release today says 130 plus. So we'll see. I mean, there could be some software updates that come that raise that to 140, 150. And yes, software updates coming because over-the-air updates come to Nissan. Finally, at last. Onboard charging, 22 kilowatts, 3-phase. That's fantastic. There's not many cars. Well, the Renault Zoe, like my car, does that. 22 kilowatt AC charging. And then some early Teslas, you could option some fast onboard AC charging or the dual chargers, but largely that's not done. So Nissan listening to their customers in Europe, and of course Nissan Renault joined at the hip, and Renault in France. But there's loads of 3-phase 22 kilowatt AC posts all over the place. Great for destination charging. Go shopping, go to the cinema if you're allowed to, social distancing. Go for some leisure activities or with the kids at the weekend or something where you're stopping off for 1, 2, 3 hours at a time. 22 kilowatt AC charging is just so perfect for those situations. It's quicker than a 7 kilowatt post, and yet you don't need to be holding up a rapid charger for 2-3 hours. 0 to 60, 5.1 seconds, by the way. That's rapid. 5.1 seconds. That is Macan beating territory. That is admittedly for the top spec Ariya, but still, that's plenty quick. All right, I know my timeline on Twitter was filled up today by Tesla fans going, "Oh, it's slower than the Model Y." Oh, yes, okay. But this is where there is an interesting comparison to draw, and that's on the price. Now, admittedly, yes, you can, if you want to, come onto my social media and say Tesla is quicker, and I'll reply, but the Ariya is cheaper. But is it really? Because prices start from £40,000. That's actually $40,000 without our 20% VAT and converting it. So it starts at 40k. It arrives 2021, but that's for the base model. So actually, I think it's a fair assumption to make. But if there's 5 models and it starts at 40 and you work your way up the spec list, by the time you do get to the big pack, the 87 kilowatt hour, the all-wheel drive, the 5 seconds 0 to 60, you probably are paying 50 grand. And then once you're paying 50, well, that's the base price of a Model Y. And all of a sudden, well, that would be a very difficult decision to make, what with things like the supercharging network. So I'm not blind to then, when you get into Tesla pricing territory, you've got to be really good to attract someone's attention. So what do the British press have to say? Well, the new Ariya features a concept car looks and a massive technological leap over the leaf, thanks to an all-new platform which is shared with joint venture partners Renault and Mitsubishi. Unlike the Leaf, which has effectively stood on its own, the Ariya uses a scalable platform optimised specifically for EVs without the need to house an internal combustion engine. The passenger space is elongated and the cockpit floor is flat, with the battery packs in a skateboard design underneath, says Car Magazine today. They go on to say that the twin electric motor all-wheel drive Ariya models have the new Nissan all-wheel drive technology. It's pronounced E-Force, but it's spelt lowercase e hyphen numerical 4 ORCE. So technically, it's E4-orse. Technically. It has four-wheel drive control, 0 to 60, as I say, beginning at 7.6 seconds for the slowest and 5.1 seconds for the quickest. And I'll be interested to see what that Nissan E4-orse technology is like and how good that is at all-wheel drive control in tricky conditions and maybe even on the track. And it doesn't say that E4-orse is meant for the track, but we'll have to wait and see. There are other Nissan cars, by the way, like fossil cars, that have this E4-orse technology. Stupid name for an all-wheel drive system. Stupid. However, so that is the brand name that Nissan are using. It's not an EV thing, by the way. So you'll see it cropping up generally on Nissan fossil cars as well. What about US media? They say the dashboard has a pleasingly minimalist design that incorporates 2 large 12.3-inch screens, one for the gauge cluster and another for the central infotainment display. A simple row of touch capacitive. It shouldn't be that hard for me to say. Climate control buttons. Well, they're integrated into the wood trim, as in the buttons aren't raised. They're not even buttons. There's just a printed, for the climate control, there's sort of printed temperature up, temperature down on the wood trim, and you just place your finger on. I think there's some haptic feedback in that as well, a bit like your phone where you push on the display. And so they're not actually buttons, but they are kind of buttons. It looks really slick, by the way. Car and Driver website says a more advanced version of Nissan's ProPilot driver assistant, it's called ProPilot 2, is offered on the Ariya. It allows for hands-free driving in certain circumstances and can execute lane changes as well. Automatic emergency braking, blind spot monitoring, and other driving assistance features are standard. The Ariya will go on sale in Japan first in the middle of next year. The US and the UK get it late in 2021. Starting price of 40k, likely to be 50k when you have the larger battery pack and all-wheel drive. And what about the tech press? Because EVs are high technology. Well, let's look to the tech website The Verge, who say despite being tech forward as it comes, the Ariya lacks many of the idiosyncratic and slightly ridiculous flourishes that Nissan likes to stuff into its concept vehicles, like a virtual assistant that's a coy fish, or a fake engine noise that sounds like a musical version of THX's Deep Note. Still, it's an EV, and it has to have ultra-thin headlights like Byton and Faraday Future. They're pure LEDs, brake lights that go across the rear like a Tesla Cybertruck, an HVAC system that can be accessed by these haptic switches on the dashboard, integrated into the wood panelling under the center screen, which offer a feeling of mechanical switches, but they're completely flat. The pros and cons of the Nissan Ariya, according to Pedro at Push EVs. Well, he likes the Nissan having adopted CCS as a fast charging standard in North America and Europe. He likes the 22 kilowatt onboard charging. He likes the active thermal management, the active liquid cooling and heating finally here. And he likes the combination of motors and batteries. But he says the biggest cons with the Ariya is the bad efficiency. Nissan is still far behind Korean automakers when it comes to efficiency. The Nissan Ariya is even less efficient than the recently introduced, and the topic of yesterday's podcast, the BMW iX3. If the Nissan Ariya had the same efficiency, an 87 kilowatt hour battery would be enough for 336 miles in WLTP rather than what it gets. It's at least a year away. The electric car will face really tough competition and the specs might not look as good by late next year. And so what does it do? Well, from the smaller battery pack, which is 63 kilowatt hours usable, it'll do 223 miles on the WLTP test cycle, so EPA slightly less. And on the big pack, the 87 kilowatt hour, 310 miles, which again is a bit less on EPA. And I got to agree with Push EVs on this because it's an average of 3.5 miles per kilowatt hour, give or take a bit. If you just do the pure maths of the battery size versus how far they say it will go, which isn't great. I mean, a Tesla Model 3 will do at a constant 70 miles an hour on the highway. It'll do 4.25 miles per kilowatt hour. That's at speed. That's not even the combined in some recent real world testing that my EV buddy Tom Malogny has been doing on the New Jersey Turnpike. So, I mean, when you think about it, oh my goodness me, I'm surprised about the efficiency, but they've got over a year till this car hits the market. Surely they're going to be making some improvements, and that is the other point that I'll do full circle and come back on. Whilst I'm excited about this car, I've seen plenty of criticism online, but that just seems to be the world these days. No one's ever happy about anything. I think Nissan have made a really compelling car. They've gone CCS combo for the plug in Europe and America. So, goodbye CHAdeMO, effectively. I hate to say it because that whole thing about plug wars, we're going to get onto that now. I hate. Why is anyone going to have a war with anyone? Why is it always one versus another? Maybe it was always going to be several plugs around the world, but certainly in terms of accessing the fastest chargers that are on the market at the moment, it does seem like the investment is being made in those 150, 350 kilowatt chargers. And so this will charge at 130 plus kilowatts. Good speed. But this time next year, there are going to be a lot of cars on the market that this will have to compete with. And this is a good car, by the way. It's a good car. If they can get the price, and it's Nissan. So the minute the car goes on sale, there's going to be offers. You're going to be able to do a deal with your dealer. You're going to be able to have that conversation about either some finance or some offers and all those kind of things. This is not going to be a case of that's the price, that's the only price. It's this time next year, the end of next year as well, the EV market is going to be really, really competitive. And I know it's tough at the moment. If you look around and you go, I'd like to drive an EV, what's on the market? And you're looking at expensive cars. There's not a lot of cheap ones at the moment, but trust me, the roadmap that's coming, the cars that are coming this time next year, it is night and day in terms of the competition. Now, those, again, the EVs are not going to be in mega numbers. The market share is going to be growing, but Nissan are launching this into a very competitive market. I think this is solid. I'd give this like a B+. Am I being harsh? I don't know. Let me know your thoughts on any story on the podcast, email or comments on YouTube. Now, look, we've done 15 odd minutes on the Nissan. It's an important car. I mean, I could have done a whole podcast. I've got more to say about the Nissan Ariya. Maybe we'll do some follow-ups on different podcasts. But let's talk about plugging in. When the 2021 Nissan Ariya launches in the US and Europe next year, it will, of course, come with CCS combo plug as the brand moves away from CHAdeMO in those markets. Now, the Nissan Leaf and the Mitsubishi Outlander plug-in hybrid are the only two EVs available in the US right now that use CHAdeMO, and the Leaf doesn't appear in Nissan's future plans. So when we look at Nissan's roadmap, there's a gaping hole where the Leaf should be. They're just going to finish off selling that car and then move to their new platform. Reports Tom Malogny for Inside EVs. When Nissan brought the Leaf to the market back in late 2010, it was the first mass-produced electric vehicle, and the the actual standard, the SAE, hadn't established the standard for the combined charging system, CCS. In fact, it wasn't until June of 2013 that the first public CCS charging station was opened in Germany. Now, also over the last few years, as Japanese and South Korean automakers have introduced new electric cars, one by one they came equipped with a CCS plug on the side. Kia's first electric offering, the Soul EV, had CHAdeMO, if you remember back in the day. In 2019, second generation Soul came out, CCS combo plug. Kia also uses CCS for the Niro EV. Honda, a Japanese car maker, the only electric car they make, the Honda E, CCS combo plug. The Clarity uses CCS. Hyundai's Kona uses CCS. Now, the eventual outcome of the plug wars, I'm less keen on that phrase, seems plain, right? But the battles are going to drag on for a long time. Nissan will continue to use CHAdeMO in Japan, where that standard dominates. CHAdeMO sockets are just everywhere in Japan. Most new DC fast chargers in the US looks like they'll have both sets of connectors. The CCS ones are going to be the faster ones, but many new rapid chargers going in are going to have at least one CHAdeMO plug somewhere. But you know what? If I was a charging company, if I was writing the checks and had my name at the bottom, because ultimately that's what all companies have to decide on a long-term scale. What are you going to invest in? Where do you spend your pennies and pounds and dollars and cents? And if it was my name at the bottom of the check, and it was cheaper to make a charger with just one type of plug on, and that would be the CCS plug, I probably wouldn't be installing anything with CHAdeMO now that we've had this news. Because if Nissan had released their next generation EV platform, and of course this is a platform that Nissans are going to be on, Renaults are going to be on, Mitsubishis are going to be on. This isn't like the Leaf that was a one-off. And so if that had been, just wedded to CHAdeMO, I probably would have said, you know what, it's worth continuing with that. There's going to be lots of drivers out there. Now we know it's only Japan. Even with maintenance, if I'm replacing old for new for old and putting in a new charger in the same spot where one that's maybe 10 years old and getting worn out, so I just wouldn't put a CHAdeMO plug on. I feel bad for Leaf owners. And look, I'm a Zoe owner that only charges on AC. And so there's lots of networks in this country like InstaVolt that don't have AC charging on. So, I'm in that boat, but thinking it through logically, I just wouldn't have a CHAdeMO plug on. Of course, there is a future for CHAdeMO because the CHAdeMO Association recently introduced CHAdeMO 3.0. It's otherwise known as Xiaoji, which is going to become the new DC fast charging standard in China and Japan. It's backward compatible through an adapter, but it's backward compatible to all versions of CHAdeMO and the Chinese GBT socket. Now, if you want to talk about the most popular socket on EVs in the world, by a country mile, it's the Chinese socket, which is GBT. And that, like I say, China and Japan going CHAdeMO means that actually on a global perspective, CHAdeMO will be the world's most important charging standard, because every EV in Japan and China in 5 or 10 years will probably have this new CHAdeMO 3.0 plug, or Xiaoji, which is backward compatible, like I say, to the existing Chinese and Japanese standards. So CHAdeMO is not going anywhere. But if you then go to Europe or the US, or I'm guessing parts of Asia as well, and where neither of those, where CHAdeMO and the Chinese GBT plug isn't popular, it's going to be CCS everywhere but there. So let's not make it a war. Let's just say that over time, different areas are going to have different plugs. Would it be great for there to be one in the world? I mean, probably, I guess so. There's different formats of TV, aren't there? There's different formats of lots of things that are around there. But as long as there's not too many, I think you can manage the costs if you're a producer. All right, let's move on. Jaguar, the XJ electric sedan. The debut looks like it's being moved back a little bit. Jaguar's been testing prototypes of the all-new upcoming XJ sedan for a while now. An example we saw earlier this year testing in the cold was even at an advanced stage, but the plan has moved back a little bit. Probably to 2021, says Autoblog. A report in the Sunday Times newspaper says the plan has changed, with the third quarter of next year being the focus for the XJ all-electric. The presentation date on the official website now reads October 2021, but we can't find that on an XJ-specific page, just that they have an electric car coming out then. In response to questions about Jaguar cancelling the XJ, a spokesperson for Jaguar Land Rover Rover said, and I quote, "Our engineers continue to work on the next generation all-electric Jaguar XJ. We remain committed to our long-term strategy and our product portfolio remains the same, but the unprecedented situation will inevitably have an impact on our immediate plans." Couple of more stories. This next one's political, and I don't like to get political on the podcast, but when you start to talk about things like incentives and government support, inevitably then you have to start talking about politics, and details about Joe Biden's environmental plans are beginning to emerge, and they do include a massive push for EVs and electric trucks. According to Car and Driver, part of Biden's plan is a program that offers incentives for Americans to trade in a gas guzzler and replace them with a pure EV. And the incentives will only apply to cars manufactured in the United States, and that would be hard to argue against. And of course, high-profile cars like Tesla have their big Fremont factory, and we know that Austin is going to be coming to make the Cybertruck and maybe a Model Y line for the East Coast as well. And more EVs. What made in the United States means, I don't know. Obviously, parts come from all over the world, but assembled, the finished bits, can the battery packs come from elsewhere, like the factory in Korea, but then get screwed into or bolted into the car in the US? I don't know what it means made in the USA, but as long as they are, they'll get access to the incentives. It will obviously benefit a company like Tesla, but also like Volkswagen. Now, Volkswagen are converting part of their Chattanooga factory to make cars on the MEB platform. Hyundai and Kia make some very competitive electric cars, but they would be left out in the cold. They don't actually manufacture their cars in the States. Well, Joe Biden's proposal includes money to install 500,000 electric car chargers across the USA and offer financial assistance to help car makers themselves convert their factories to all-electric vehicle production. And the final story today is all about the Skoda Enyaq. This is a cheaper version of the Volkswagen ID4. Now, the Enyaq and the ID4 will share the same platform, that is VW's MEB platform. It'll feature those Skoda styling, and the production version of their car, what was the concept, the Vision IV, revealed last year, is coming in Enyaq form. Says Motor One, Skoda is expected to offer two versions of the Enyaq, one with a single motor, one with a dual motor. The dual motor could be making about 300 horsepower or 225 kilowatts. Those looking for most range will want the single motor model, and production of the Enyaq starts later this year. Sales and deliveries begin early 2021, and it'll be one of 10 new electrified, not all electric, electrified, that just means a battery of some sort, that Skoda will introduce by the end of 2022 under their sub-brand of IV. The Enyaq, the ID4 looks nice. It's going to be the first car that VW bring to the US. It's that crossover style. The Enyaq looks good. Skoda always sell a little bit more competitively on price, and so you get access to that technology at a slightly lower price point. I've had one Skoda in my lifetime. I had an Octavia Estate. It's the one that many in this country you'll see the police driving on the motorways. It was like the VRS. It was all Audi bits. When you lifted up the bonnet, it was a 1.8 litre turbo, and all the logos on the engine bits were Audi bits. Of course, all VW group. But that was a great car. And actually, the Skoda have done a lot over the last 20, 30 years, as part of VW as well, to really make that brand more desirable than it ever was the butt of jokes when I was growing up in the 1980s. And so, we're looking forward to that car coming soon. Thank you very much for listening today. It's been a rapid fire. I know it's been full on today, but I want to get a lot of information in the podcast. You didn't need to listen to this one at 1.5 speed, did you? There was a lot in there, but I'd love to get your feedback about any of the news stories that we cover. My address is hello@evnewsdaily.com, or leave a comment on the YouTube show. Well, there are 839 previous shows in the archive. You can get them all for free. I'd never charge for this podcast in a million years, because there are some very kind people and companies that cover all of the costs for you to listen to this show for free. They are called patrons, and they do it through a website called Patreon, patreon.com/evnewsdaily, and you can support like $5 or $10 a month or more if you want. It's like a couple of posh coffees a month, which you might not even be having at the moment if you're not commuting as much. And you can fund the work that I do, the enormous amount of research that this show takes to put it together, to record it, to produce it, to publish it every day. I'd like to be further ahead than I am, but thank you very much to everyone who supports, and particularly my premium partners of Phil Roberts of Electric Future, Brad Crosby, Avid Technology, Brightsmith Group for Clean Tech Talent, Porsche of the Village in Cincinnati, Audi of Cincinnati East, Volvo Cars of Cincinnati East, and now nationalcarcharging.com and allohacharge.com. Have a wonderful day. I'll catch you tomorrow. And remember, there's no such thing as a self-charging hybrid.